live show is coming up. It's a special edition for ZEG, for Computer Says Maybe. And we have brought together on this panel diverse group of panelists. So Alix will sit together with satirist Armando Iannucci, a data scientist, Christopher Wylie, and producer Adam Pincus. And together they will talk about how can we create stories of very complex tech issues to make them more vivid, irresistible, and urgent. So I'm excited to hear more. Please welcome on stage.
Okay, I think we have a live stream too. Okay, cool. So we have people hopefully phoning in from around the world to watch this session. I think it's the only session at ZEG that's being live streamed, so it's kind of, I don't know, an exciting moment. There are people that have not been with you this week who are now joining for the first time. My name's Alix Dunn, and I'm the CEO of The Maybe, and I host the Computer Says Maybe podcast. And we have the occasional live show with wonderful guests to dig into topics related to technology, politics, and sort of how technology is remaking our world. This session has a lovely title that I can't take credit for, but The Elephant in the Algorithm. And the joke there, I think, is that the elephant in the room about technology politics is that we're not very good at making them resonant for audiences that aren't expert. And we come up with these terms like surveillance capitalism that don't necessarily transmit to people that aren't nerds focused on this subject. So I'm really fortunate to be joined by three people who work to make difficult political questions and concepts more vivid for publics by telling just really good stories. So even if you're not interested in those topics before you watch the things they make, afterwards, hopefully you feel more connected to the content and more engaged in the subject matter. So I wanted to sort of start with a question to each of you, just to get a sense of why you think this is so difficult. So my question, just to kick us off, is sort of why are we so bad at telling stories about technology? Like, what makes it so difficult? And I feel like maybe I can start with you, Adam, and then we can go this way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really difficult to tell stories about technology. It's burdened with a lot of jargon. The ideas are a little bit complicated, and they don't become personal and they don't become emotional very easily. So I think the challenge is, how do you kind of reframe a lot of those buzzwords and those concepts that are pretty hard to penetrate, and ground a story in somebody's experience. And I'll just give you an example that I'm working on a documentary right now where it's really about surveillance capitalism, a term that we've talked about that's really tough. Like, what does that even mean? And I could give you a terrible and probably very long explanation of it and probably get half of it wrong. What I've been saying to the filmmakers is, I think what we have to ask, our subjects, and what we need to explain to the audience is, what are you afraid of and what did you do? Because those are things that ground it more in things that we can all, hang on to. But I think that it's things like, phrases like surveillance capitalism, where you're like, I don't even quite get it, and I don't understand the stakes. I don't know why I should care.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Chris, you want to jump in on this?
I think in this sort of AI tech space, whatever we want to call it, even just the fact that I struggle with naming what it is, the space that we're in, highlights the issue. I think we have not collectively come to what I think of as the silent spring moment for tech. So if you look at what popularized or really mainstreamed the environmental movement back in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And the majority of the book is like data and facts about essentially how we're destroying ecosystems. But the reason why it's called Silent Spring, and I think the reason why it resonated with so many people at the time, was the prologue, which is not that long. It's just a story about a town where all the birds have died and spring is silent. And I think her contribution to what then later sort of spurred on the popularized environmental movement was that prologue, because it really encaptured what it really means to destroy the environment, that your spring will be silent. It won't be spring anymore. And I think with AI and technology, we have yet to find that story that captures the attention of people and really grips them emotionally to understand what it means for the future of our society and what world your children will grow up in.
That's great.
First of all, although it's nice to be here in Georgia, my luggage is in Paris, which is why I'm dressed like this, since it's how I arrived. But given that we're live streamed, if anyone in Paris has seen my suitcase, could they send a picture? I think that's right. And this ZEG calls itself a storytelling festival. Story doesn't mean, it's all false, it's all made up, it's all pretend. It's just a way of outlining a narrative of facts. It's a way of allowing us to process otherwise difficult and unfathomable ideas. For me, the tech, and specifically the AI problem, is we have mythologized about it in the past, and we've got this myth of AI turning human, turning sentient. And we've told ourselves, until it does that, it'll be fine. Now, as it slowly progresses, we realize that becoming human is not the story. It's the fact that something can be so complicatedly programmed and pre-programmed that it behaves like it's human, but never is human. And it's trying to find a way to tell that story, I think, is the way into that particular subject.
Interesting. I love that you brought up mythology, because I feel like we will come back to that.
Yeah.
But Adam, I want to talk a little bit about a project that you've been working on that just went live yesterday?
2 days ago.
2 days ago, called What Could Go Wrong, which immediately makes me want to know the answer to that question. This is a project with Scott Z. Burns, who's the screenwriter for Contagion. Do you want to say a little bit about that project and sort of what you have learned about constructing stories that help people understand how this stuff works, the implications and the stakes?
Yeah, I mean, this was interesting because during the writer's strike, I've worked with Scott in the past, and during the writer's strike, when they were not able to write TV and movies, I had a conversation with him where he said, look, there's a lot of anxiety about AI amongst my peers, and during COVID, the film Contagion had a real second life, in that a lot of people watched it and were struck by how much it reflected what we were all going through, and those two things combined led him to this idea that maybe he could do something he'd been unable to do prior to this by himself, which was come up with a sequel to Contagion using AI. And I think in his mind there were two lines of kind of questioning. One was, could AI predict the next pandemic scientifically, which I think we pretty quickly abandoned. And the other was, could it be a creative partner, which is really where the show goes. And I think that the core of this is it's a show founded on anxiety more than anything else. He's just anxious. He's anxious about the future, as a lot of people are, and he wants to try this in a kind of a genuinely curious way. And going back to sort of, I think one of the questions is, how do you tell a story about something really abstract? Is we basically created characters out of a bunch of different AIs, and they recur over and over again. And they flounder, and they get things wrong, and they hallucinate, and they are full of hyperbole, and they flatter, and they flirt, and they do all these things, which I think shows you a lot about how the technology operates. I would say to get its hooks into you, but for story purposes, it works pretty well, because they become recurring characters in a narrative about Scott's attempt to understand something. And Scott's essentially a proxy for the audience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a new way of telling a new story, but I feel like you're also working on some things that are maybe old stories where we're seeing technology politics manifest in sort of traditional power struggles. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work you've been doing around Sidewalk Labs, or kind of your exploration there?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story that actually came to me through a mutual friend of ours named Roger McNamee, who said to me when I met him, he said, I want to make this, stayed with me, he said, I want to make the Philadelphia for technology. I want to make a story that is emotional and works on an emotional level so that people understand what's at stake here, and it changes their minds by affecting them. And we kind of cast around for a little while, and then he sent me a piece about an effort that a subsidiary of Google called Sidewalk Labs had abandoned in Toronto. This is right as the pandemic was starting. And it is really a story about them trying to build a smart city from the internet up, this is their language, in Toronto on a 12-acre waterfront site, which met first with great enthusiasm. You know, they use all the best words. You know, it's going to be sustainable, and it's going to be innovative, and it's going to, you know, improve all of our lives. It's a word cloud of wonderful things. And then when they were met with some questions, and they answer those very cagily and opaquely, they got some skepticism and then ultimately resistance. And some tech companies respond to resistance with disregard. You know, they're very tough to embarrass, and I think Chris knows one in particular. But Google hates it. And so they just packed up and went home. And that's that story.
Yeah, we actually interviewed Bianca Wylie in the fall, who was one of the organizers that I think that resistance period took a little bit longer than initial resistance, sort of leading to Google leaving. It was actually city meeting after city meeting of, I think, Bianca and other people showing up and saying, you keep talking about innovative building projects. What is innovative about these projects? And some of the conclusions after asking that question a lot of times is that they were using timber. So basically her process was, let's take in good faith the public engagement consultation that the company's saying that they will participate in. We'll take it in good faith and we'll go and just ask questions. And eventually they got, I think, so irritated. And maybe also just they don't like pushback at all. They like people to get excited about their products.
Yeah,
not,
it's amazing.
Pushback, yeah. Well, I think, Armando, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, when I heard you were going to be a guest on this panel, I was thinking about Selena Meyer from Veep making AI legislation. And I just kept picturing that and thinking about the public conception of what the government can and can't do when it considers these new technologies, and how in the public imagination there might now be a sense that these people can't regulate these technologies. And I wonder a little bit, one, about what you think about Selena Meyer making AI regulation, but also how you see satire being part of the process of mobilizing and communicating the implications.
Well, first on Selena Meyer, I mean, maybe I'm so close to all this, but I just know that most politicians don't understand it. You know, you've seen the Zuckerbergs of this world sitting in front of a panel of senators, and one rather elderly senator saying, so how do you make money? And can I click on this? And, you know, it's, so politicians are easily bamboozled by people with money who talk business talk or who talk tech confidently. And they see it as something that they can, for a large amount of money, can get taken off their desk, that they personally don't then have to deal with, and that they can then get the credit for. And I think, you know, part of the stories I'm telling are, you know, we have to do something about that because these people are not as good as they say they are. You know, these are people who, at the age of 20 or 21, started something that then, in the mid-20s, have a company that is recognized by, you know, half the people on the planet. They've never had to experience conflict or pushback or competition. And have also grown up with the fact that they can hoover up anything of ours as long as we get their service free. They can take anything that belongs to us and somehow not pay any taxes and get huge profits from it. And that's what I'm. But I see it in the UK. The UK's just done a big deal with Palantir. Palantir now has access to all our medical data. That's not good. So politicians are just easily swayed by these individuals. And the more we can show that, then hopefully the more we can show. The other thing I try to avoid is anything that's too bleak, because people will switch off if it's too bleak. So try and make it funny and try and make it possibly hopeful. Try and show a way out if you can.
Yeah. You're working on a project that maybe is taking on some of these questions directly.
I've been working on a movie that's set in that world of social media, but I found over the last couple of years making the mistake of trying to say too much. You know, you can somehow, these themes are endless. The data, the information, the people you speak to, you can go on researching it. You can research it for years and you still haven't got to the essence of it. So I'm going to temporarily park it while I step back and try and, boil it down to the key storylines. I think with big cumbersome stories like this, I think you have to try and identify the one or two interesting themes and go in through the human perspective, find one or two interesting characters and just rely on them to take you into the wider picture. Don't feel you have to force feed them all the information and stuff, because that's too much. As a viewer, that's too much to take. So it's now about trying to tell the story properly and carefully and not in a sudden rush of information.
Yeah. Chris, I feel like you maybe also struggled with this, making Captured this audio. Is it a book? Do we call it an audio book or an audio series?
I think it's an audio. I'm not sure, actually. I think it's an audio series.
Okay, so we'll call it, that sounds better. So this audio series, part of that exploration was around AI as a religion, which I think is a really interesting frame, especially since you brought up mythology. Do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of juxtaposition that you explored in terms of the people that are so excited about these technologies and the people making them, trying to construct it as a myth and a religion, and then maybe a little bit about the realities and how you told stories that sort of made some of those sort of dissonance between those two things clear?
Sure. So when you listen to all of these sort of big name tech bros talk about the future, one of the things that they claim is a definitive knowledge of where society is going to be, what it's going to be shaped like. They speak with absolute certainty about where we're going and what they're building and what that will do. And I found that really interesting, especially when they start talking about how powerful everything will be. So when you listen to people like Sam Altman about this grand power, or Elon Musk about this grand power that AI will become, that it will sort of subsume all human knowledge and reach what they call the singularity point, which is the point where AI not only encompasses all human knowledge, but surpasses our capabilities to create superintelligence. And then when you look at people like Elon Musk, where he not only is experimenting in spaces like AI, but also with neurotechnologies. So Neuralink, creating human-computer interfaces, brain-computer interfaces, with the goal, as he puts it, of creating both a read and write function with people's minds. Eventually, as he puts it, being able to take someone and just plop them into a computer. And if you think about sort of what that means, you create a super intelligence that transcends our capabilities and knowledge, that also transcends our physical and mortal constraints, that can exist forever as long as there's energy, and then that we can put ourselves into it and live forever and transcend death. To me, that feels like a religious prophecy. And when you look at a lot of religions throughout history, one of the things that they promise is in some way transcendence, in some way being able to exist beyond our current realm or our current existence. And this is the thing that they all seem to be working towards. It's interesting because they all talk about it very openly, but when you look at sort of how the media reports on it, almost all the time they're making these comments and they're sort of discarded as like these offhand, Elon Musk literally said, "I think God will emerge in my servers." I mean, and what the reason I find that troubling is then if you sort of extend that and think, okay, so if this AI is some kind of like supreme being, right? And then we're putting this supreme being all throughout our homes and our societies. Speaking of like storytelling, like if you think about the genre of like a haunted house, right? What makes ghosts scary? Ghosts and spirits are scary because they're these sort of invisible things that can see us, that can watch us, that can subtly change our environment, but we can't see them, we can't touch them, we can't interfere with them. And we are very helpless in that situation, right? Like, a haunted house is scary because we're helpless. We have no ability to fight back. But that is the house of the future. We are creating a haunted house. It's haunted by algorithms. And so for me, when I look at religion and spirituality and all of these things, I think it makes AI make a lot more sense, particularly when the leaders in Silicon Valley see themselves almost as messianic prophets that are going to be the ones that conjure up God. And their actions make a lot more sense if you understand that they see themselves as prophets.
Do you want to jump in? I saw a little.
No, I'm just clocking this story because I
Yeah.
find it so fascinating, honestly.
Yeah, you're making me think about haunted houses, which I guess is the point of storytelling.
There's something also about these people who rely on that's the label of genius, because if we call them a genius, it means that only they can understand what it is they're doing, and it's actually pointless to question them, pointless to say, will this lead to bad things?
In the same way that we don't question the prophets.
Yeah. Yes. We take the it's like 1950s where the priests were, senior figures within the community that we wouldn't question. Same way we wouldn't question what the doctor says. So we've been conditioned to not question what Sam Altman says or what Elon Musk says. I mean, that's breaking down with Elon Musk, but they still maintain that belief that they're the only ones who can see it. And therefore, why can't they have all our resources at their command to make it happen?
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, that might be the ketamine talking, though.
Yeah. I mean, it's and if the world doesn't understand us, then we'll just bring the world down. We'll drink the Kool-Aid and we'll all sleep forever.
Dark.
It is dark.
So, and then we have to make that
Can't
optimistic.
be too bleak, I've been told. I feel like what's interesting also about recalling religion is that religions are often global in nature. And I feel like I think a lot about, is it a religion or is it a cult? And I feel like cults are a little bit more localized. So maybe there's like the cult of the Bay Area, and then we have these religions. And I don't know, I wonder if you could unpick a little bit the scale that these guys are operating on in terms of the global imagination and how story, how you can make stories that resonate with so many different people around the world in the way that they have.
Well,
Let's pass that to you.
is that
Me? Or who?
I mean, whoever wants to
sure.
jump in.
I'll chip in afterwards.
Yeah.
So when you look at religions, you can have cult-like groups of extremists, and then you can have a wider group of passive followers. I think it is at least quasi-religious in nature, in the sense of, or at least it's developing characteristics of it. Because even when you look at people like Brian Johnson, who also talks about living forever and integrating with the AI, but in the meantime creates like really strict lifestyle codes of how you need to behave, how you eat, how you sleep, right? It's sort of like the kosher for tech bros. And I look at all of that, and it feels like some kind of new, at least quasi-religious movement. And that it's not just a cult, because you have a wider periphery of people that are slowly, whether they realize it or not, adopting these ideas and internalizing them as well.
And if you look at any study of religion will show you there is always a need. We have a need to find some belief that can take us beyond ourselves. And if we can join a movement where there are many people who believe this, then we've found a community and so on. And maybe as traditional religion has died away, you then get the new age, the religion of well-being and wellness and so on. The thing with what's happening now is I think people are attracted to it because it feels like a religion, but they feel it's founded in fact, because there's a science to it. It's to do with technology, so it can't be silly, it can't be false. There's a reality to it. And I think that's what gives them the confidence to see the Musks of this world as like the savior.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, but I think that there has been some movement with a lot of people, at least, from seeing these things as benign or benevolent. And I do think it goes back to about 2016, where you first start to see technology companies look not like the do no evil, source of innovation and progress, and instead look a little bit more like I think many of us see it today, which is incredible concentrations of power who project an inevitability about the products that they're creating, which are businesses that they want us to consume, right? So I think that narrative has shifted, and there's more skepticism today than there was, 3, 4, 5 years ago. I mean, I even think about the sidewalk story as emblematic of this, because when they come to Toronto, Toronto can't believe their luck. The little Toronto that I think has as you would say, like a little bit of an inferiority complex about the United States, and can't believe that they're pick me at the highest level. They can't believe their luck. They go on a journey themselves and realize that they've signed up for something that they don't understand, where the motives are not clear, where the deal's a little too good to be true, and maybe that's because they are, in fact, they don't understand really what they're giving up. One of the things that I think you hear all the time, so another problem with telling stories about tech, is you'll say, well, privacy. And people will say, well, I don't care about privacy because I don't have anything to hide.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think that's the whole story, although my own ability to sort of tell you why that's problematic is really limited. I think you could explain that much better than I.
Sure. I think when people talk about privacy, they often frame it in the position of hiding, right? And people will think about, Snowden and the NSA, and okay, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so if it's spying on me, so what? They can go look through my dick pics for all I care. But the problem with that is that privacy is the foundation of your ability to craft who you are and how you want to exist in the world. When you go and live your life and you go to work, you have constructed an identity and a persona about who you are at work, which is different than who you are with your children versus who you are with your lover versus who you are with whomever. And it's only privacy that enables you the ability and power to determine how you want to exist, how you want to show up in different realms of your life. If you remove that power of being able to decide and determine who you are, and you hand that over to something else, you lose your ability to be you. And that's what privacy is. It's our ability to construct who we are.
Yeah, I think of it as an instrument of pluralism, that if we don't have privacy, you can't actually be the specific person you are in the fullest way possible, because you can't. There's a system of control around you that makes that impossible. But I think this point that there's been a pivot, I think everyone has seen it. We went from being like, Google, great, Gmail, wonderful, Facebook, wonderful, Arab Spring, wonderful, to these guys are really creepy. They do all kinds of things that would be crisis communication disasters for any other company. Like, most of these companies should have been embarrassed into bankruptcy a long time ago, and yet they've accumulated more and more and more power, sometimes through constructing these mythologies and these religions. So let's now turn to them and sort of think about the power of story to counter the stories that they're telling, because I feel like that's the name of the game now, is figuring out how to construct world build, essentially, where we can imagine a world where they're not the architects of all of the infrastructure around us. And I want to draw on something Timothy Snyder said yesterday when talking about the role of narrative in imperialism. And he made this really interesting point that when you're thinking tactically about how to counter imperial narratives, you can't go head to head with it, because if you go head to head, you end up reinforcing the dominant narrative. And so I think, and then he said, rather, you should cover the rock, this like hard narrative of imperialism, with so much interesting ivy that the rock disappears and there's this like something new sprouting from it that just distracts people from that kind of core message. And I wonder a little bit, like, how do you all think about creating stories that don't react to the dominant narrative and paradigm, and instead help audiences really engage with new possibilities, entirely sort of new worlds that we could be living in?
Well, I mean, I think that humor is a big piece of this. And one of the things that we tried to do with the Scott Burns show was to make it funny in equal, at turns, right? So you might have someone like Meredith Whittaker, who's, we've talked about, very, very smart speaker. She, and very good at communicating ideas. And she comes into the show to basically say, how credulous do you have to be to believe this story? Like, what a chump, basically, for buying their narrative and even thinking that this thing could collapse. What are you even talking about? You're going to collaborate with it. And then Scott, who's our character, does it anyway. And has these sort of surreal encounters with these AIs where he's completely flummoxed and embarrassed and doesn't know what to say or do. But I think that the juxtaposing those two things, somebody extremely sober saying, let me tell you what is real. And then a character who is sort of, like I said, a kind of a stand-in for all of us, saying, okay, but I'm still curious, and I'm just going to continue to flounder along and move forward, which I feel like is what we're all doing anyway. It's like, yeah, no, I think I understand the risks. I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, comment is important. I think its role is much more like, it's like an insurgency rather than an equal but opposite force, like you were saying. You can chip away, you can be funny about the humorlessness of these people. The fact that, Elon Musk's jokes are some of the worst jokes ever devised by man or machine. I was told a story about Nigel Farage, who is a right-wing politician in the UK, and it was a comedian who was about to do an event with him, and so she introduced herself as a comedian. He said, I don't find comedy funny, which just said everything about what we're dealing with here. And they don't find jokes about themselves funny. They get very irritated by it, as do most dictators. So if you can chip away there, but I think that's just minor work, really. In the end, it's, what is the alternative? I don't know what it is. What's that story, that hopeful story? I do remember once being at an event sponsored by Google, and it was like a TED weekend, lots of 20-minute talks and whatever, and AI this and, charity that and whatever. And across the weekend, the theme was meant to be optimism, except the keynote speaker at the end was Stephen Hawking, who came on and said, I beg you, be careful with AI. It will kill us all. And everyone was going, he's meant to be optimistic. What do we do? What do we do? It's Stephen Hawking. We can't, do we switch him off? No, we can't do that. What do we do? There was just something inherently comical about that fact that he breached the kind of the religious code that we were all meant to be following for those 2 days.
Or maybe that was his version of optimism, that will all just be ended quickly by AI.
Or maybe he was kidding.
Maybe he was kidding. Yeah, maybe it was a joke. But I feel like even that, using that frame of AI is going to kill us all, is in many ways reinforcing the very narrative that they want us to be thinking about, which is that these systems are so all-powerful. They're going to be so... Yeah. And I find that like the pretend spectrum of the optimists who say this is going to solve all the world's problems and the pessimists who say it's going to kill us all, they both think the same thing, which is that this thing's going to be really powerful. And I feel like most thinking people don't feel that way, or at least are skeptical that
or highlighting the mistakes it makes and that they're hallucinating it makes. And I remember you last year saying that when that was at its height of, they were looking for more money. You were saying that they have to project this thing as this is going to be great because they need the money, not because they know. You were saying they didn't know. They don't know where it's going. But they
still
don't. They still don't.
A lot of it's still bullshit.
Yeah, there's serious Ponzi scheme vibes happening. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, so Roger would point that out. I think when we first started this project, he said, listen, they're going to be out of business by Christmas. And when I pointed that out to him, that Christmas had come and gone, he was irritated by that fact, but I don't think it changed his point of view, which is, that it is an investment story. that is, very much to our detriment in terms of its use of energy and water and all these other things. And this myth of competence is, in his view and many others, exactly that. It's a myth that, so Meredith Whittaker being one, Osama Fayyad being another, who we talked to, who's like, no, this road doesn't go there. Like, maybe somebody someday will come up with something that will be powerful enough to kill us all, or any of the other sort of narratives of omnipotence and that it will replace us all, etc. We're buying into something that, this product doesn't go there. That's his point of view.
Yeah. I also think the social decline because of social networks that leads to countries dissolving their public health functions is probably much more likely to kill us than some technology system. But so you mentioned we haven't had the story, so when using Silent Spring, which I think is a really good example, there's obviously, we're in Georgia, which has a different set of problems related to technology. This idea that you can have global stories help people understand enough in a contextualized enough sense to sort of articulate what it is that they want, I think is really tricky. Like, I don't know if there is one story. It feels like we need lots and lots and lots of stories. So how do you see that happening? Like, how do you feel about the overall kind of direction of storytellers being able to produce the kinds of stories that help people understand the implications of all of this?
I think of the example of Black Mirror, which is just a set of very different stories, but around a certain theme. Because I think that's right. I think it's impossible to tell this one story because we don't know how it ends. We don't even know if we're still at the start of it or in the middle of it. There's nothing tangible. It's like global warming and climate. How it's very hard to show a drama about climate change because it's not a singular event, and it's set sometime in the future, but we don't know when. And that's a hard thing to dramatize because it's hard to make personal.
Yeah, a plug for Ministry of the Future, which I think does a really, really good job of that, but it is really tricky.
Yeah.
Adam, did you want to?
Well, no, I think trying to talk about it, these are kind of abstract ideas, and they don't land, I think, very easily with us on a personal level and they make you feel powerless. And I think that it's easier to tell a story that demonstrates something about an individual, that you can sort of understand the experience of and relate to your own life, that I think is a lot easier to try to tackle the problem that way. I would say it's easier to be specific than to try to tell sort of a big story, because the big ideas are really complex and they're really abstract. And I'd rather see something in miniature that sort of speaks to a larger idea. I just think it'll be easier to do and probably more effective too.
And I think you get at the big ideas by doing that also. Yeah. Like, there is a single truths, I think, that come from individual stories. But
yeah.
You want to jump in?
I think people are capable of moving from the specific and individual to the national and international and the global.
That's the power of story.
It's about story, but also the way we watch stories now, we can access dramas and comedies from all around the world. Yeah. So we feel less detached from a drama, even if it's from Scandinavia or even if, because we connect with the people in it.
Yeah.
So that's the way in. And we feel we're being given something that's false if it feels like it's been dressed up to appeal to an international audience. It's almost like the more specific it is, then somehow the more it becomes a symbol for everyone.
I think about, not to bang a drum about religion, but when you look at the amounts of conflict, the amounts of debate, the amounts of activation of people that the stories of religion has prompted throughout history, I don't know if I fully agree with what you're saying around that we need to distill it down to a specific character in a tiny environment and exemplify something through that small thing, because that's not what the Bible does. per se. I mean, this is a series of stories for sure, but there's wider ideas that people go to battle for. I mean, you had an entire crusades. And so I think it's, if people start to clock that what's happening with AI is not simply technology or simply the future, but it's actually ideology, that's, once people internalize that it is ideology that is being imposed on them, not AI per se, that you might sidestep this issue of storytelling, because people will engage and defend their livelihoods against a threatening ideology once they realize that it is a threat.
And an ideology. Yeah, I think that's
And an
really
ideology.
right. Yeah.
Maybe that's a task for the journalist or the documentary or that coming together of a group of people who don't want the government to tell them how to run their businesses, allied now with politicians who believe in government being as small as possible. I mean, that's a story that should be told, but it doesn't have to be done fictionally.
Yeah.
The
shrinking of
facts are all there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, your example of Palantir is a really good one. Well, I'm mindful of time. We started a bit late. No shade on the last session, but they were late. I was thinking we could turn to Q&A for like 5 minutes. Can someone from ZEG tell me if that's okay? It's okay? Okay, great. Okay. Oh, wonderful. We got 5 minutes back. That's great. Also, folks on the live stream, if you want to ask questions, let us know, and we can try and feed those in. I see hands, but there are lights in my face, so could someone else find a microphone and find those people? Yeah, there's 2 up front. Or somebody's already got a mic.
Thank you. Mark Mullen. I wanted to ask about in storytelling about sort of new, complex, weird things, the process of naming those things, and how do you come up with those names? Is that a part of the process? Is it not? Should we let that happen organically? If you do feel that naming is an important part of the storytelling, is there a process by which you do that? What role does it play? Thanks.
That's super interesting. I think the name Palantir is a really interesting choice because it comes from Lord of the Rings and is an evil, all-seeing figure. And we've decided to have the NHS partner with them as their primary digital partner. Kind of creepy, But what are your thoughts on naming things? You all spend some time doing that.
We were talking outside about having to come up with the science, the phrases about climate early on.
Yeah. So I think back to, so we talk about climate change now, and everyone knows sort of roughly what that means, even though none of us are climate scientists and we're not technical in that regard. I mean, I couldn't explain exactly what, ozone is and how, sun rays affect all the different chemicals. I don't know, but I understand the principle of climate change. And these words all had, at some point, an origin, right? So if you go back, I think it was to the 70s, when NASA wanted to brief Congress on shifts in meteorology that it was noticing, that it was concerned about, it literally had to decide what to call it. And so global warming, this idea of global warming and greenhouse gases, to explain what are all these chemicals doing. It's like a greenhouse. These are terms that emerged and that then we adopted as a public as a way to quickly talk about these complex things. And at least in the AI space, we kind of have done a kind of shit job at coming up with words and terms to describe these like complex things. Where even on panels like this, we all have moments of struggling to kind of encapsulate what it is exactly that we're talking about. I think about like all the things that AI are doing. It's like we're displacing humanity. What do we call that?
Yeah.
But
the replacement has been taken, hasn't it? Really?
Yeah. oh gosh. Yeah. No. Yeah. I would love for people in storytelling or science fiction or whomever to like come and say, here's some idea. Like if you were writing a story about the future of a political debate about AI, what would they call it?
What would we call it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Another really powerful one, I find Amnesty International did a report about what's happening in Palestine, and they titled the report Automated Apartheid, which I found another really powerful, like boom, boom. And I think it's those sort of phrases that transfer so much, they pack in so much information and they're kind of catchy.
Yeah.
And even if you don't really know what you're saying and you repeat
But
them,
then,
it's
of course,
helpful.
the phrase then becomes everything. So
Yeah.
it was global warming, and then the likes of Trump would tweet, well, I see snow. Where's this warming I've been told? So you then have to change it to global emergency. So, the phrases are there as a way in, but they're not then freezing the concept forever. They're not defining it forever. We have to keep refreshing how we describe these things.
Yeah, interesting. Names have a half-life. Okay, next question. Yeah, there's somebody here.
Yeah, hello. Wonderful insights from a wonderful panel. I have a question to Mr. Iannucci. Roughly 3 years ago or so, we had an interview, and something you said kind of stayed with me. I asked you whether you felt threatened in your line of work because of the rise of the AI, and you said you didn't, because you still could not find a single good joke told by the AI. And it has come a long way since. Has it learned to tell a good joke, and what will happen when it finally pulls it off?
Well, it's still, I'm blessed with having the initials AI anyway, so I can always say that I'm, yeah, no, I don't. But it still hasn't. I mean, it may get there. Somebody I knew asked AI to write a column as if written by me. I read it, and it was terrible. I mean, but I could see what I was trying to say, but the examples it was using were just the wrong examples. Like a machine that still doesn't know whether this is a glass or a nose. It still hasn't worked it out. So there was the shape of humor without the actual meaning of humor there. But who knows? I don't know. I'll never say never. But what I have noticed is the difference in just those 2 or 3 years. It's got a lot more sophisticated. But I still cling to this thing, if it's generating ideas and thoughts based on what it knows. Things like comedy and poetry and so on, I suppose, are all about new ways of describing things. So it's when it gets to that stage that it's found a new and interesting way of describing something that will have made a significant leap. I don't know if that's coming, but...
Did you want to jump in?
I think to your point, I would agree that it's not. We're nowhere near the point where you could be replaced, if ever.
I'm close to retirement age anyway.
But just to add to that, it's because when you write and you draw on lived experience, you have experience, right? You're an embodied being that goes through the world. You're not a database, right? And so when you look at LLMs, they don't have embodied experience. We haven't given them that yet. This is also why, by the way, within AI, the big conversation right now is how do we give AI eyes, ears, nose, and also bodies to actually experience the world? Because the reason why it's so intuitive that this is a cup and not an ocean or whatever is because we've experienced it. AI doesn't experience things at the moment. And so I think, at least for now, you're safe. In the future, I don't know.
I think you're good. There was someone, yeah.
Hi, thank you for a very engaging conversation. And I'm really also taken by the title, Elephant. The elephant in the algorithm or the elephant in the room, and likewise the reflections on religion. And I think most of the people in the room would agree that any structure of power that is unaccountable becomes a problem. And one of the things that we have with most of the forms of technology or social media is a massive asymmetry of power. And in a strange way, one of the elephants in the algorithm is us, constantly handing over, whether it's our data or handing over the fact that we can't leave Twitter when it's become X because it's become the commons. And so I wonder if you could reflect on what that reformation or revolution in power structure might look like, or where the opportunities are. That's my question.
You want to take it?
It's interesting. I think, again, I don't know what the discussion is here. In the UK, there's this debate now about whether phones should be allowed in schools and when children should be allowed to use social media. So there's beginning to be a recognition that it's not totally a good thing, and that we should start talking about how we disengage from it to a certain degree, so that we're not, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, switched into it. So that's the start. That's a bit of, that's certainly something definite I've seen in the kind of the discussion about it at the moment. But we know, of course, that any kind of CEO of any tech company will be lobbying elected representatives to stop that from happening, even though they'll never allow their children to grow up being on social media until a certain age. We've got to be braver about not giving it so much money so readily. The tax exemptions it gets for taking all our property, intellectual property. Again, I see those discussions happening, but when are those debates actually going to turn into votes? I don't know.
I would also say the frame of individuals handing things over implies consent. Yeah. And I think that the structural power that has been accumulated by like 8 billionaires is such that I think it's the responsibility of nation states who have stepped back, yielded so much space to these 8 dudes. And I think until you have Mark Zuckerberg in jail for what happened in Myanmar, and you actually have political action taken at the level of breaking up these companies, it's not fair to say, random school teacher in X town using her phone and connecting to Facebook as she's somehow ceding power. I think the people that ceded power are the ones that should have been representing us and fighting from these structural power being built around us, would be my take.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I just wanted to add, because there is this internalized feeling of powerlessness. And so I teach at NYU, and I was telling a colleague that 2 things that had been recommended to me. One is I gave them their midterms in a blue book with a pen. And I was like, this is about finding out what you know, right? I don't care what ChatGPT knows. ChatGPT can, is not in my class. So at least not that I'm aware of right now. But the first thing is I want to know what you know. So you're just going to write it down in this old-fashioned book, and I'm sorry that we have to do it that way, and I'm sorry I have to read your handwriting, but them's the breaks. But this colleague said to me, like, I actually require them to use ChatGPT because I think it's inevitable, and so I want to see how well they can use it. And it blew a fuse in my brain. I mean, I don't know even how to react to that, because I don't agree with that statement. I don't think it's inevitable. I think if they use it, they're shortchanging themselves. I mean, technically they're also cheating, but they're shortchanging themselves more than anything else. And I want to find ways to steer them away from thinking like that more than anything else.
Yeah. Okay, I think we are I just got a little hand wave. I know there's several other questions. I presume you guys will be hanging around. Maybe conversation will continue. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks you all. This was great.
Thank you.